Good afternoon and welcome to our Faiths United webinar on loneliness and mental wellbeing, organised by Faiths United and the Faiths Forum for London in collaboration with a range of national faith bodies and specialist organisations including JAMI, the Mental Health Service for the Jewish Community, MINAB and the Hindu Forum of Britain. I'm Sarwat Tasneem, a behavioural change consultant. Today, we'll be discussing loneliness and mental wellbeing, how loneliness has affected the communities and some of the challenges, behaviours and anxieties people are facing during lockdown. We will hear from experts in this field who will share insights, experiences and advice. We also have a Q&A at the end of this session, so please do send your questions via the Q&A in this webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce our first guest, Baroness Barran MBE, Minister for Civil Society and the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. Thank you so much for joining us today, Baroness.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Baroness Barran, loneliness is one of the greatest public health challenges of our time. A government strategy was introduced only last year. How has COVID-19 changed the agenda and what interventions have been put in place? Can we help people who are living on their own or experiencing loneliness due to culture or identity?
So thank you for that question and thank you again for asking me to join. I think that COVID-19 has affected loneliness work in two very different ways. So I think to start with the positive, I think that everybody in this crisis has either felt lonely themselves or has worried about a friend or a family member or a loved one who they are concerned might be feeling lonely. And I think it's become more acceptable to admit that one's vulnerable. And we know that just talking about loneliness can be helpful. So I think in a positive way, whereas perhaps previously as a Minister for Loneliness, I needed to convince people that it mattered. I don't have to do any convincing at the moment and it's easier to talk about and that's broadly a good thing. I think the thing that worries me is that COVID-19 has been anything but a leveller and we know that the impact particularly on BAME communities has been tremendous and more widely on those people who are living in poverty and it has exposed a lot of those inequalities. And so I worry that that is a fundamentally quite divisive aspect and certainly I've been very, very struck at the levels of isolation that some communities have felt and some individuals have felt as I've tried to talk to people over the last few weeks. So I just think, you know, sitting from where I sit, I just think I need to be doubly sensitive and we all need to be doubly sensitive to that.
Thank you so much. It's interesting you mentioned that in terms of sort of interventions or what's been introduced since the pandemic. Has anything changed?
Well, obviously a lot's gone online at the risk of stating the obvious. So I think again, sort of some of the things that have changed are the absolute outpouring of volunteering help all around. So whether that is, you know, a local WhatsApp group, a COVID mutual aid group, the NHS volunteer responders, the kinds of volunteers who work for charities large and small all around the country, there's been a real fantastic surge of generosity. I think that people really want to be helpful. And I think we've also seen a lot of creativity in terms of the offer online from, you know, pretty sophisticated trauma and counselling kind of services at one end to I've been part of, you know, the Chatty Cafes scheme, which is now meeting online, the Friendly Bench, which is meeting online. So I've sat on virtual benches and drunk virtual cups of tea, all of which is a good thing. And we got a virtual great get together coming up, led by the Joe Cox Foundation. So there's lots of good stuff, but again, we have to remind ourselves not everybody has access to Wi-Fi. Not everybody has devices that they can join a conversation like this, and for those people, that accentuates the isolation.
So would you say that sort of current climate, now's an opportunity to really tap into what we talk about Great Britain or even sort of London as the wonderful, colourful culture that we have? Is that a means for people to seek access and support?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I'm a glass half full person. So I think let's try and build on success. And we've really seen at that hyper local level, a terrific response. And there are obviously, other forces going on, particularly around race at the moment, where I think many of us, this is aside from loneliness, but I think many of us, I can speak personally and for my family and colleagues and many others, are seeking ways to build bridges across communities in ways that perhaps we weren't as actively doing as we should have been. So I think there's a lot of things kind of converging at the moment, and we should build on that positive human kind of searching for connection.
Thank you so much, Baroness Barran. I'm sure we will have a few more questions from the viewers regarding your point just then. We certainly have a better understanding of what there is and how we can best utilise in order to lean in and support others. So thank you for your contribution. Now, it's also very useful to understand current events from an academic's perspective. Our next distinguished speaker is Professor Wendy Byrne, the President of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and she's here to share her thoughts. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me. I'm not sure I'd really describe myself as an academic. I always think of myself as a jobbing clinician, but anyway, it's a nice title, so thank you.
Over modest. Professor Byrne, what behaviours are we expecting? Has research prepared society for this type of pandemic and loneliness? What advice or mechanisms can be used to address the need for well-being or a sense of social togetherness?
So we don't really know what to expect. Unprecedented has become a bit of a cliche as a word, but this pandemic is unprecedented. So we don't actually know what it's likely to do to people, but we can work out some of the possible things that might happen. We know that at the moment people are feeling worried, sad, fearful, and anxious. And we know that there are some people who are particularly badly affected. So people who are living on their own, people who are elderly, people who have underlying health conditions that make them more at risk from the virus, they're all going to be affected more. And then there are the people whose jobs and income may be lost, and they're feeling really worried. What we've seen so far is an increase of stress and anxiety, also an increase in domestic violence. We mustn't forget about that. That is definitely going up with people being locked in together. We don't know about self-harm and suicide. It's possible that that might be increased. We do have ways of looking at the suicide rate, and we've improved those. So we're getting information faster now for different groups of people. So if the suicide rate does start to go up, then we'll spot it. Although what's most likely to put the suicide rate up is actually the economic impact of the pandemic. It's more likely if we go into recession, that's more likely than the pandemic itself. And then we've got to remember all the people who've lost people. So many people have lost people in those dreadful circumstances. They've not been able to see them beforehand. They've not been able to be with them when they've died, and they've not been able to have a funeral. And the funeral in a lot of cultures is really, really important for people. So they've missed out on that, and that is going to have a long-term impact on people. Italy, we're watching Italy because they're a little bit ahead of us, and they are beginning to sort of see psychiatric referrals and psychological problems. We have to be careful that we don't medicalise things. So although I'm a psychiatrist, the last thing I would want is everybody who's upset by the pandemic coming to see a psychiatrist. We do need to sort out who was mentally ill before, and it might be exacerbated by what's happened, who's developed new mental illness, and who actually isn't ill but just needs some support. And remembering that the psychiatric services in the UK, and Paul knows this as well as I do, started from a very poor level. The whole of the NHS started this pandemic in a bad place, but we were in a worse place. We've been under-resourced for years, so we could be running into problems. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it would be interesting to sort of hear also view from Baroness Barran in terms of the dialogue, the initiative that Baroness Barran is leading, the loneliness, and with specialists like yourself, Professor Byrne. Is there anything you can sort of shed light in that capacity?
You want me?
Yes, Baroness Barran.
You were asking me about our tackling loneliness network. Sorry, Sarwat, I wasn't quite clear what the question was.
In terms of having dialogue with the likes of specialists, mental health specialists, so having a better understanding on where you can take your program, your initiative, how that can best service people, communities, individuals.
Well, I think we are interested in working with experts or jobbing clinicians, however you want to describe them. I prefer expert. Of course we are. We want to understand what's practical and doable, but I'm sure that Professor Byrne would agree with me that the more preventative work we can do, the more in the nicest possible way we can keep people in good mental health and away from clinical services, the better. So we've got a big emphasis on the prevention end, and I know that Paul is nodding and he will come on and talk about that more in a moment.
And absolutely, and nothing would make us happier than to have a drop in referrals. We would be really pleased.
Thank you. So it's fascinating and insightful comments. Thank you both. When looking at resources and help, mental health support is key. Our next speaker can shed some light on this matter. It's my pleasure to introduce Paul Farmer, CBE and CEO of Minds, the large mental health charity. Hello, Paul.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Paul, mental health charities have come out in full force to offer support and advice. Do we look to organisations like yours to lead, or is now a time to form a coalition that represents the many different facets of society, including faith, as the predicted cases of mental health challenges are expected to be extremely high in the coming months?
Well, first of all, thank you for asking me to join this conversation, and it's already a really rich discussion about how we think about some of the positives that have come out from the last few weeks in terms of that greater sense of connection that has emerged in some communities, and also some of the resilience that has emerged, and thinking particularly about faith communities where doors have been shut in a way that probably none of us would have ever thought of in our lives, when our faith is often a very important part of our maintaining of our overall well-being. But I think we've also heard from Wendy about, who's definitely an expert, by the way, we've heard from Wendy about, some of the potential challenges that this creates. And at its most fundamental, we have lost, the very phrase self-isolation in a context of a conversation about loneliness is really interesting, isn't it? So we've institutionally isolated ourselves from each other, and that's removing one of the protective characteristics that we have to maintain our mental well-being. So we know we're all going to have to work incredibly hard, and in fact I think probably many communities have been very resourceful in thinking about how you do that. Who would have thought that faith communities would be streaming their services online in quite such large numbers, and small groups of people within faith communities coming together to share their faith in a very different way from the way they might have previously done. So where I think which is not an answer to your very good question about the role of mental health charities, where do we sit in all of this, I think is quite rightly a sensible question. So I mean, I think first thing, I've been unbelievably impressed by the way in which the mental health voluntary sector has mobilised itself and just got out there and supported communities in a whole variety of different ways. And I was hearing this morning in a call with our 120 local minds about the resourcefulness and ingenuity of what local minds are doing. For example, one of our local minds, as well as turning their services online, as you've already heard from Diana, that lots of charities have done that, but some of our local minds have been sending the people they work with on a regular basis postcards to ask how they are, knowing that they don't have access to telephones or smartphones or Wi-Fi, really thinking particularly about how to connect with the people that they are in touch with. And so I think broadly speaking, we're doing three particular things as voluntary sector organisations. I think first of all, we're a place for information. We know that many members of the public have really wanted to try to understand what they should be doing to look after their mental health at this time, and they've been flooding to us in there. I mean, we've had nearly 2 million downloads of our coronavirus and mental health information over the course of the last few weeks, and we're not alone in that sense. So I think we're a trusted source of information. I think secondly, we've been playing a role in making sure that the people who we work most closely with, and Wendy's absolutely right, we know there's particular concern about people who have existing mental health problems during this time, so it's our job to make sure we're supporting them so that their mental health doesn't deteriorate any more than it absolutely has to. And then thirdly, I do think our role, I suppose I'd like to think our role has always been this. It's our role as collaborators, as friends, allies to other community organisations. And we've recently been supporting through an investment fund that the Department of Health gave us to support other community and voluntary organisations. We've been able to support many community and voluntary groups who don't look or even sound like mental health organisations, but they're just there to provide that well-being and resilient support for people. And I think particularly at this time where we are really concerned about the experiences of people from our Black communities, are concerned about the experiences of people in different faith communities actually, I think our job is to say we're here to help, and do that in a way that is very respectful, and listens to what people really need from us. I don't think we have the magic bullet here, the magic solution. I think the solution is inside communities.
Thank you, Paul. I mean, it's encouraging to hear that. Would you agree then in saying that the support that the charities like yourself are going through a learning curve? So this pandemic's allowed you to, it's exposed you to those different communities and in what needs and who needs assistance and the best way forward.
We are learning all the time. It's such a, I think I'd like to think we're a learning organisation all the time anyway, but I think in this environment, if you go in thinking you've got all the problems, then, frankly, that's a very wrong place to be. I think we're really hearing, needs, and we're also hearing solutions. And sometimes I think our job is actually to almost combine those two, where we hear solutions in some places to bring those solutions to other communities and think about how we can provide, the platform for people to share those solutions. I think we're learning a lot, and I do think in this, particularly in the context of the communities we're talking about today, inside faith communities, if we're committed to trying to prevent people developing mental health problems and tackling loneliness, then the role that faith is playing for many people is hugely important. And you know, we've done work with a number of communities over several years, but I think it's really made me think we need to focus on this a little bit more as part of those protective, those protective characteristics that we're going to need to build. And you know, we've got a long way to go yet, I think, before we're fully out of the woods. So you know, we do need to find ways for people to be able to connect probably in quite different ways from the ways we necessarily would have thought, but building on those strengths and are maybe playing a role to help bring those mental health conversations into those faith communities where sometimes that might be harder to do. Thank
you so much, Paul. It's really helpful advice. I know that some of the questions are already beginning to come in. There's a lot of discussion about the need and the sort of expertise in volunteering and how that's been useful across all faiths, and how maybe this should be encouraged more. It would be interesting to hear all of your thoughts later on in this discussion. Now, many of you may have heard and seen our next speaker through sharing of his story and the very personal journey of his in mental health, most notably his social media campaign, Find Mike, mental health campaigner, ambassador for Jamie, Jonny Benjamin MBE. Hello, Jonathan.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm well, thank you. I'm well. Good to see you. Mental health illness is still deemed a taboo within many societies. You have been active, and you know, you've been an active advocate of mental health as someone with lived experience. You're also an ambassador for Jamie. Why is faith representation for mental well-being awareness so important to you, and what can we do to involve younger generations?
Yeah, no, thank you again for having me. So yeah, obviously I grew up in a Jewish community and went to a Jewish school, and mental health was it was such a taboo for me growing up, and for a lot of people, but particularly within my religious community. It was just, when I look back to the school that I went to, the only thing that we got about mental health was they showed us the film One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I don't know if you've seen that film, but it's pretty, that was our mental health education at this school. Thankfully, things have changed now. I've been back to my old school, and people are having conversations about mental health, which is amazing, actually. But I mean, to be honest, it's actually Jamie, the charity is called Jamie, the Jewish Association of Mental Illness, and I mean, they've been just tirelessly working within the Jewish community, going into like synagogues and Jewish schools. And I mean, they've been working for decades trying to get into these places. And it's only in the last few years, through their hard work and determination, that finally the synagogue doors and the Jewish schools, they're opening their doors and saying, come in and we need to talk about this. We need to address this. I've definitely seen a massive shift in the last few years. I mean, you know, in the heart of the Jewish community in North London, we have a mental health cafe on the high street. It's called Headroom. It's in Golders Green. And I just think that's just testament to how far we've come. We've still got a long way to go in our community. And something, you know, we've talked about is obviously working with other communities, which I agree, but I would love to see more, particularly within the Jewish community, more people working together, as in different parts of the Jewish community. You know, you've got obviously the Orthodox part of the Jewish community, you've got different movements, and I would love to see them come together, particularly during this time, and work more closely with each other, because, you know, we're all having to deal with the same thing here, and let's unite and work together. But I feel really like positive, I think, about the future in terms of you know, mental health awareness and the way it's being treated within the community. And I'm definitely seeing younger and younger Jewish kind of mental health activists, which is incredible. Because yeah, as I said, when I was at school and I was struggling, no one talked about it. But now, yeah, I'm seeing younger and younger Jewish mental health activists, which is they're standing up. They're not afraid now to stand up. I mean, in my synagogue, there was a young boy, he's 13, he's just had his bar mitzvah. he suffers from OCD, and he stood up in front of the whole congregation on the day of his bar mitzvah and said, look, I have a mental health issue. And it was amazing, you know, you know, it's just really promising for the future. I do feel like I'm going to stop because I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I feel like the younger generation that we have, you know, they are, you know, if you look at the climate change activists, they're the ones that are leading the way forwards. I feel really, really positive about this next generation that we've got coming up in terms of their activism and not being afraid to use their voice. And I definitely think that's true for the Jewish community, which is really, really promising. And I hope it's true for other faith communities as well, but I'm not sure.
We'll soon find out when we hear from Rashid. But it's interesting that you were talking about the young Jewish community. Are we doing enough as society, or, you know, are institutions doing enough to support the younger generation who may be finding it challenging to be open about their well-being? What's your take on that?
There's definitely more that could be done. I mean, again, going back to Jamie, the organisation, what they're doing now, which I really like, is they've got wellbeing reps in their Jewish schools. Every Jewish school has a wellbeing representative that are planning like programs for young people, and now in the universities as well. In a number of the universities around the country, there's Jewish wellbeing reps as well, which is great. But it's still not enough. I mean, you know, as I said, I went back to my school, my Jewish school, and you know, it's great that there are people doing stuff and talking about it, but there's still a number of people that we need to reach, particularly young men. You know, whenever I seem to talk at, you know, in the Jewish community to young people, and I'm generalizing here, but usually it's the younger females that will talk and, you know, not be afraid to, use their voice. But the younger men, they're less likely to, you know, actually say when they are struggling and when they need help. So definitely still more work to do. But I do feel that, and actually, I do feel that I would like to see more in the Jewish primary schools. So we've got to focus on the secondary schools and the universities. But, you know, we've all talked about prevention, and it needs to start in primary schools. So what I tend to see is that in the Jewish primary schools, it's maybe one teacher, two teacher, a few teachers that are really passionate, that want to make a difference. But it needs to come from the top. You know, to come from all the head teachers and the governors of the schools. So definitely a lot more work to do, but I do feel that we're moving in a positive direction for our next generation, for sure.
Thank you. It's interesting, some of the comments that are coming in. People are saying how fantastic Jamie have been as an organisation and helping them, and also a comment from a young Muslim individual who said that they've actually looked to Jamie to fill in the gaps where they haven't had or they haven't been able to find the answers. So thank you, Jonny. That takes us nicely on to introducing our next panel speaker, Rashid Rose. Rashid is a clinical counsellor, founder of the Caribbean Health Initiative and advisor to the Salam project. Wonderful to have you join us today.
Thank you very much for having me on. Much appreciated.
From your experience of providing help and assistance, is faith and mental illness talked about enough within the Muslim community or within communities per se? Also, from a socio-economical perspective, what mental health support is there for minorities that are struggling?
Well, first of all, let me say I was brought up in the Caribbean where mental health is rarely ever discussed. And for those of us who migrated to the North America or to Europe, it's still very much the same thing too. So if you're struggling with mental health, you're very unlikely to seek support that you basically need. Having said that, with this coronavirus as it is, and we've been told it's affecting some groups more than others, the support mechanism really needs to be in place to pick up the pace after the virus actually subsides, because Afro-Caribbean people and African people really, very rarely speak about mental health. So it's for us to encourage them to speak up a bit more, seek the relevant advice that they need, seek the relevant help that they need, and they talk about socioeconomic conditions. Because the virus is affecting allegedly one group more than the next, financially, people have been calling me for advice and guidance. And I work with the Salam project, and we haven't yet have the capacity to deal with the level of inquiries that we've been having. Fortunately, something that we're looking to put into place moving forward, because there's definitely a need for more support, especially in the Muslim community, Afro-Caribbean community. And we are hoping we will be the ones to help to provide or to fill that gap. And I'm one of the ones spearheading that project in terms of capacity, helping and support, financial guidance, and more than anything else, bringing the communities together to support each other in this crucial time, because this is an unprecedented time for people, Black and white. And people are having to struggle in terms of how they're going to make ends meet. They have to struggle about the bills, and that in itself bring along a lot of pressure. So the capacity, like I said before, to seek help and to ask for guidance really needs to be put on the platform. I don't think NHS will have the capacity to pick up the slack when this whole virus dies. There's something that really needs looking at, because a lot of people will need a lot of help when this virus do come to an end, and hopefully sooner rather than not.
And in your opinion, Rashid, what do you believe is necessary to, you said now is a time for communities to come together. What do we have to do? What needs to be in place?
I think the support mechanism in terms of looking out for your brother, man, first and foremost. If you know someone who is struggling, if you have the expertise in terms of skill, you really need to extend that support to that person and signpost them in the right direction. Because some people are very shy in terms of seeking help and support. So supporting each other in terms of guidance, in terms of signposting them, these things are very, very important. Because like I said before, some people really don't like to seek help. And you have to advise them, and more than anything else, encourage them to come forward and seek the necessary help required for their own personal benefit. Because some people would rather not seek help at all and suffer in silence, which is really not very good. So in terms of doing anything productive, look out for your fellow man, see where he's struggling, and lend a hand and point him in the right direction.
That's great. That's great. And it's interesting. We've just had a question from Claire, and Claire works with the St. John Ambulance Community Engagement Team, and she's asking, how can they engage across all communities? Maybe this is something, Rashid, you can advise, because they're prepared, and what they're wanting to do is provide first aid and health resilience sessions. So what would you say to a Muslim community about the importance of having firstly access to this, and that there are people out there from these fantastic organizations that are wanting and are willing and are ready to provide that service?
I would suggest, because we had someone from Mind come on earlier, and it would be interesting if Mind could start expanding into local mosques, etc., in terms of setting up some satellite systems in mosques. I think that would go a long way, because there's enough organizations around the world, but Mind is well known. And if Mind could extend the services into local mosques, that will really, because I know Muslims are very skeptical about speaking about mental health. But if Mind could work with Muslim leaders and community leaders to extend the services, however small it may be, as a starting block, that may open up the doors that is required for people to get the kind of help and support that they need. So I think Mind may have a very important role to play, if I may say so, in terms of extending the services to places which haven't yet. So it's new territory for Mind, if I may say so, because I'm a former chairperson of Mind in High Wycombe. So I understand the dynamics of Mind. It's a very productive and organized organization. So if they could extend themselves into local community groups, and like I said, the mosques, churches, this service would go a long way in terms of reaching people who haven't yet been able to reach productively.
Well, let's allow Paul to answer.
Sure.
That's a big question, and
sure.
Yeah, maybe a big ask. Paul, what's your response to that?
Well, actually, thank you so much for the offer, and we would love to come. I think you make such an important point, Rashid, about the challenges that people often face in talking about their own mental health, and we really want to make sure we're working alongside communities on that in terms of supporting people to feel people can find the right language that they want to use, the right terminology that fits with their own experiences. And we've, as part of the Time to Change campaign that we've been running for several years,
sure.
Some great examples of work in local communities with different faith communities. And I'm particularly thinking in this context of a piece of work which we did with a number of imams, where we were thinking about how you help people to talk about their well-being, their mental well-being, through the lens of the Quran, and how people can talk about their well-being in the context of their faith. And there are parallel opportunities to do that across a variety of faiths. I've certainly seen examples of that in the Christian faiths, and also in the work that Jamie has been doing. In fact, such a great example. So I think, we're very happy to come and spend time, and I think we do so with a lot of humility, because we want to we want to understand the experiences that communities have of their mental health. And I think in the current context, where we're recognizing that for many people in Black and Asian and ethnic minority communities, their experiences are kind of rooted in experiences of racism, in experiences of poor mental health, poor experiences of mental health services as well. We want to make sure that we sit side by side with individuals and communities to really help and support that mental health conversation, because that's the way we're going to tackle some of these really big challenges together. So yeah.
Can I just say, I also work with the Seventh Adventist Church in High Wycombe, who annually put on a mental health event with Wycombe Mind. And that's very, very effective. Very effective. As a matter of fact, I made a phone call yesterday to the Aylesbury prison to work alongside the Seventh Adventist Church to deal with the inmates in this environment, because at the end of the day, prisoners are also suffering, neglected to some extent. So the plan is to work with the Seventh Adventist Church to go into the prison to see the impact this whole coronavirus has had on the prisoners. So the outreach work is not one-dimensional. And like I said, Wycombe Mind and the Seventh Adventist Church really put on a great event every year, fully attended, and it's something that I would like to see extend to other areas of the country. It's really, really, really very useful. Very useful.
Thank you, Rashid. I'd like to pose that question to get Baroness Barran's insights or ideas about the concept of faith and culture and mental well-being. Baroness Barran, would you like to share your thoughts? So Baroness, I believe you're there.
Sorry, I was just saying it's a giant question, but I was on mute. Apologies for that. I think that what we all need as human beings is to feel valued and not judged. I think that sometimes one's faith community can be the most supportive thing around you, and at other times it can feel like it really judges you, and it can change from week to week or different bits of the community. So I think faith communities obviously have a really important part to play, but as humans, we evolve and have differing needs, and so should have connections within our faith communities if that's appropriate, but more widely if not. I hope that answers your question a bit. I could go on, but I know there's loads of questions coming up, so I'll keep it brief.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll go to some of the questions that have come in. Now, this is a question from Gordon. Gordon says, we know that male suicide is 3 times the rate of females. What can we do to help men of all ages who are struggling with their lives to discuss mental well-being? Jonathan, I'd like to pose that question to you, if I may.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, massive issue for all communities. So within the Jewish community, as an example, it was actually my dad helped set up a fathers forum for men, because so me and my dad actually we started giving talks on my experience having a mental health issue, and his experience as being a carer for me at times, which is, again, we don't hear enough about how mental illness affects not just the individual, but other people, you know, family members in particular. So me and him, we started giving talks, and whenever we would give a talk in a synagogue, yeah, we'd have parents often come up to us and say, oh, my child is struggling, and usually it was the mums that, you know, would maybe go to the support groups and talk, and the fathers felt, oh, we need a place for us. So yeah, my dad helped set up a fathers forum, which is great. It's now gone online during this time, and they meet regularly to support each other. You know, maybe they've got a child that's struggling, or a spouse, or maybe they're struggling themselves. But that peer support is just so invaluable. And outside of the kind of whole faith thing, I'm seeing more and more men's support groups. So there's something, for example, called Andy's Man's Club, which is spread all over the UK, which is men's group that meet up every Monday online. And there's another one called Human, HUMEN, which again is a male meetup group. And I've been to a few of these, and it's quite amazing. Men are just able to connect and listen and feel part of something and be vulnerable. So yeah, I mean, personally, I'd like to see more and more of these kind of men's groups. You know, I don't know if other faiths are doing similar things, having just men-only groups, but that could be an idea to kind of tackle, just one idea to tackle the dreadful suicide rate that we have. There's something really powerful about men sharing with each other. I don't know what it is. It's pretty powerful.
Do you think that there is that, you know, obviously you've shared your experience within your own community. A lot of sort of comments have come in saying that there isn't enough support for men out there. We don't hear about those experiences from men. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's you know, we've had a history of kind of the whole man up concept, you know, has been going on, well, for forever, that we need to really kind of break down this whole thing of, you know, man up and get on with it, or big boys don't cry. You know, it's going to take a while, I think, for us to, well, for men in particular, to get rid of that whole concept of it's not okay to be vulnerable because I'm a man, it's not okay to struggle because I'm a man. It's just a kind of ingrained, I think. You know, I know it was for me. You know, my dad used to take me to football matches and as a kid, and that was the only place where I saw men cry and be open and be vulnerable. And then as soon as we left the football stadium, the kind of shield went back on for these men, and they were, so I think that really needs to change, that whole concept of, manning up. I think manning up should become, talking and being vulnerable and being okay to cry. But it's going to take a while, I think, for society to really shift. But I think as well, we need to, and it's difficult with the pandemic, but I've been seeing a lot of male-focused services. So, for example, there's something called men's sheds, which is men that get together and maybe they go to the allotment, and while they're gardening and using their hands, they're able to talk and be vulnerable. Or there's other charities like Calm that, they'll go to, like, for example, the pubs and the clubs when they close at 2 a.m, when maybe people are, had a few drinks and more vulnerable, and they'll try and target the men that way, to be able to talk and open up. So I think we we need to look at other ways to reach men, because the traditional talking, you know, face to face, we know there's a huge dropout rate for men in the mental health services. So often traditional forms of therapy maybe don't work for some men. So we need to look at other, but that's hard during the lockdown when everything's gone online. But I think that's something for us to think about.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. We've just had a question that's come in from Manzilla. Manzilla's wanting to hear from Professor Byrne, Baroness Barran and Paul. Their question is, I'm pleased that Baroness Barran is leading this work in government. In thanking all the panellists, I'd appreciate and salute their work. Can Professor Byrne, Baroness Barran and Paul Farmer say what they are doing about diversity and developing their internal structures in terms of having experts from diverse backgrounds? We go to Professor Byrne first.
Hi, thank you. So we've done a lot on this within the college. We kind of thought we had to get our own house in order first. So we've done quite a lot, and we did actually. We won a prize last year. We won European Diversity Charity of the Year prize. So we're really pleased about that. And now we're kind of moving on to the next stage. I mean, we do have a very diverse membership group. So a third of our psychiatrists are from BAME communities. Just under half of us are women now, which is a big change. You know, 10 years ago the college would have been men would have been much in excess of women. So we're nearly equal there. I'm finishing as president of the college in a few weeks' time, but Adrian James, who's taking over from me, this is going to be right at the heart of his presidency. It's one of his kind of goals, is to look at equality and diversity within the college and without. So a short answer is we've done quite a bit, but we need to do a lot more.
Thank you. Paul?
Yes, I mean, I think two observations from our point of view. We have inside both our national and local organisations, as you've heard, people who are very connected to their local communities. Around about 20% of our national staff come from a BAME background, and we do have quite a long track record of really both campaigning and working on tackling inequalities in the round, and with a particular focus on the experience of particular communities of mental health services and of mental health stigma in particular. But I think we know that we just don't do nearly enough in this area, and we are very conscious that you know, as an organisation that has been around for a while, we can seem to be quite a white and not very diverse organisation. I think we are quite diverse, but I think we have to really acknowledge our own white privilege in this as well. So we're very much looking to further work with communities, to spend time with Rashid and others in terms of how we make sure we're responding to the needs of particular communities. And just to mention, inside our leadership, we have a constitutional requirement as a charity that at least 2 of our trustees have to come from a background. And I think that's really important, that the leadership and the governance of an organisation has the voices of people from different communities absolutely around the table when it comes to making decisions. So we are doing some work in this area, but I do really think we know that there's so much more we need to do. And I think particularly in the current context of the COVID crisis, we know that many people in particularly in BAME communities and others have been adversely affected. So we need to pay particular attention to that in the course of the next few months and years going forward, really.
Thank you, Paul. Another question that's come in, which leads on nicely from your answer. If I could pose that to Baroness Barran, please. How are we listening to local BME voices to gain a better insight into current health and wellbeing practice patterns and trends? And that's from Said in Leeds.
So I'm probably not the best person to be able to respond in terms of health specifically, because that doesn't fall under my brief, but I can try and respond a little bit more widely, if I may. So, and in a way, this links back to the earlier question. So I think the starting by listening. So 2 examples I can give you. I've set up a small BAME sort of advisory group or listening group where I'm doing the listening, and we're meeting at fortnightly intervals, and the agenda is very much set. So these are leaders of local charities from the Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities, and they are picking the agenda on the issues that matter to them, that they would like me and colleagues in the department to focus on. So we've started doing that. I'm also doing something, and I would encourage people to get involved if they can, called Local Link, which is trying to talk to a local volunteer or somebody who's just been amazing over the last few weeks and months. And again, I mean, I know this feels like a small thing perhaps to all of you, but I insisted that the first person who I spoke to was a person of colour. And I'm trying very hard, again, in my own personal things like Twitter and other things, to make sure that I tweet at least 50% of anything I tweet or retweet is about people of colour or retweeting people of colour. So I just think it's something to keep uppermost in my mind as a government minister, and try and stay as connected to those of you who are living it day in, day out, in a way that is not my heritage.
Thank you, Baroness Barran, and it's encouraging to hear. We have a question from Tracy. Tracy says, I support victims of violent crime and those struggling with various mental health issues while dealing with the loss of loss myself through the Josh Hanson Charitable Trust in memory of my late son who lost his life in an unprovoked attack. My question is, how can I get the support while offering support? If we could hear from Paul and then possibly Rashid afterwards.
Well, first of all, Tracy, what courage to be doing all those things simultaneously when you're managing your own loss, but also, helping others. And of course, it's often people who are most personally affected who want to try to do something to support other people. And that's something we recognise a lot across the work that we do. It's so it's one of the ways often that people find some solace and some hope from what may have happened to them, to their own personal circumstances. But I think it's very important to think about looking after your own mental well-being, and thinking about your own how you do take care of yourself. I think one of the things that I've reflected on over the last few weeks is that we've all been put under possibly the greatest pressure many of us have ever been put under for all kinds of different reasons, and that requires us all to pay attention to our own mental well-being, to take some time out for ourselves, to be able to take advantage of the fact that we know that things like physical activity is good for our mental well-being, and being able to kind of find the space to do things that are not necessarily connected to the other things we're doing in our lives. But also, I think this is where peer support is so helpful and so important. So if inside your organisation there will probably be other organisations like yours that you can reach out to, and I'm sure if you want to get in touch with us later, we'll be very happy to try to connect you to other organisations who can help with that. But peer support of organisations is great, and I do think, I'm sure Diana will have a view on this as the Minister with responsibility for the voluntary sector as well, and formerly from the voluntary sector. I think the voluntary sector is absolutely amazing at providing peer support to each other, and I think that's a really important part of what we do. I think it's one of our real strengths. So please do reach out for help from other organisations who are in your position, because sometimes that it's not necessarily might be a formalized peer support network that you might be able to find, but often it's also mutual and voluntary peer support, quite informal, where people are prepared to provide a listening ear and think about how you look after yourself, because it's so important that we take time to think about our own well-being as well.
Thank you. Rashid, would you like to add anything to that, please?
You can hear me?
Yes, hello.
Good, yes, good. Let me start again. It's very important that we look after ourselves and look after the others around us, because one of the things I've often said as a counsellor, the counsellor needs counseling sometimes, because you are not an island. So if this person want to get in touch with me sometimes, or sometime, I can offer whatever little support I can, because it's very important that we look after ourselves. Our mental health could be at risk if we don't nurture it properly. We have to know our own capacity, how much we can take on, how much we can give off. But supporting ourselves, especially in this crucial time, and supporting others in the same field is very, very important, because at the end of the day, we are the ones gifted the responsibility, let's use that word, or the skill to deal with those people who are under most stress and most pressure, and especially in a time like this. So the support for each other is very important, very, very significant. And without the support mechanism in place, we could struggle personally, we can struggle individually, and that is what we don't want to happen. Like Paul said, we need to reach out to each other and create some sort of network, support mechanism network, to make sure that we carry things forward and the counsellors are sustained mentally and physically.
Thank you, Rashid. Professor Byrne, would you like to share your thoughts, please?
I don't think I have a lot to add to what they've already said, but I think the point that they were stressing is that if you're supporting someone else, you need to support yourself. And that's a model we have in psychiatric services, and I have actually done some training in kind of formal psychotherapy and supervision, and looking at your reactions to the person that you're helping are absolutely at the heart of that. So just completely agree with the last two speakers.
Thank you, thank you. We're nearly approaching the end of our webinar, and we've had I think a very relevant question that's come in from Reverend Bonnie Evans-Hills. Her question is, are there any groups keeping track of individual experiences and stories during this pandemic? This is very much a collective trauma, and as a nation, stroke world, we will need a process of recovery afterwards. And an important part of that will be the ability to tell the stories. So I will put that question out there to the entire panel, if you'd like to share or summarize.
I'd say that social media allows us to share stories in a way that we've never really experienced before. We see all sorts of things on social media, don't we? And some of the things that have come out about race have been shocking to me. And I thought I was aware of racism, but some of the stories I've seen from my own members of the college, who've suffered the most awful atrocities around racism, and they tell them on Twitter. So I think the stories are shared. Yes, we need to capture them for the future, but they're there.
Thank you. Paul?
Yeah, I think actually I think there are a number of tracking pieces going on. I know we're working with Public Health England to really capture all the different pieces of data around the country's well-being. So lots of people are doing different surveys capturing that. We've just completed a survey of which has 17,000 responses for people with mainly people with mental health problems and families, who are telling us, you know, we've got a lot of data, but also lots of people telling their stories about their experiences during this time. But also it's worth noting that many museums and heritage organisations are also capturing this heritage, this piece of history that is being created in real time using social media and others. And I wonder actually whether there's an interesting piece for faith communities to do in this space. So I think telling faith communities coming together and telling their own stories would be really helpful. I'm certainly conscious of a number of academic groups who are working with faith communities to help tell their stories, and I think this is a very you know, the lens of faith through looking at the COVID experience through the lens of faith, I think would be a very interesting one to tell, and would really, I think, help a lot of people to understand how important faith communities are, both the formal community of services and events, but actually the informal communities that that faith groups provide to with individual parishioners and participants in activities. I think that might be a really interesting thing to encourage, actually.
I agree. Thank you. Would any of the other panelists like to share their final thoughts?
I've just got one thought. The charity, the Centre for Mental Health, actually are collecting people's stories, and from tomorrow they're launching something tomorrow, and they're looking for people to share written accounts of their experiences in lockdown that they're going to collect together. So that's another one to look for, is the Centre for Mental Health.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
I was just going to add very briefly. I mean, I think the stories will be so contrasting, won't they, between stories of extraordinary human generosity, action, and pain. So we've got the full range. But I heard somebody say the other day, they quoted the author Isaac Dinesen, who said, there's no trauma that can't be managed if you can tell a story about it. And I thought that was a very poignant quote for this time.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Just to mention quickly, I have set up the Caribbean Healthcare Initiative, and it's really to map the journey of Afro-Caribbean people in the mental health struggle. So that's something I'm actively working on, just to put that out there.
That's wonderful. I'm sure we will we'll be able to share the resources after this webinar via email or on the website. Details will follow. I would like to personally thank each and every one of you for tuning in and participating. Thank you to our guests for their contributions. Our mental well-being is what helps us engage, feel, function, and build meaningful relationships. If you're struggling or know of somebody who is struggling, reach out, share your experience, connect. A conversation can be all that is required. You just may be surprised what we have in common. Thank you.